Hey everybody, KC here. So I'm in Manhattan, in the NoHo neighborhood of Greenwich Village. That's north of Houston Street on Broadway. And this is a really interesting format. It's called HealthQuarters. And the concept behind this is to centralize the healthcare providers that any given neighborhood might need. Now, in this case, the folks at HealthQuarters are partnering with Mount Sinai. And what they do, there are a number of Mount Sinai doctors who are here in various practices, but they've also contracted with other kinds of healthcare-oriented practices, ophthalmologists, dentists, things like that, to be able to provide a centralized healthcare experience and do it in a way that kind of removes the friction from the experience. And as you know, we talk a lot about that a lot here on Morning Newsbeat. You always want to remove the friction wherever you can. So some pictures are going to run below, but I actually had a chance to talk with the guy this is his brainchild, Bhavdeep Singh. Now, you may know that name. He used to be with Ahold, before that with A&P, and he's got some really interesting ideas for how this is going to roll out and even how it might interact with and affect retail. So I hope you enjoy the interview. You should check out HealthQuarters. It's a really interesting concept. I'll put the website below as well. Enjoy. Welcome to Morning Newsbeat.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Pleasure to be here. And happy to be here with you.
So tell me, what was the light bulb moment with HealthQuarters? What was the moment where you said, ooh, I got an idea?
Well, to be very honest and to be fair, it wasn't my idea. I actually worked with some investors who had been thinking about this whole idea of aggregating and bringing together healthcare in one place. And what clicked for me, there was a light bulb moment. What clicked for me was that healthcare delivery, at the point where a patient goes to see a doctor, or you go to see any sort of provider or an emergency, whatever it might be, is healthcare delivery really is a form of retail. And that was a big light bulb. It wasn't just a light bulb, it was a big one because, what occurred to me is that I have watched as a retailer, I was about to say former retailer, but as a retailer, I've watched the industry change so much over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And what became really obvious and the big glaring issue for me was, but a visit to the doctor's office is almost identical to what it's been the last 20, 30 years. And that was the big light bulb that, being a form of retail, is there some opportunity here?
Well, I can remember in some ways having the exact same conversation with you when you were at Ahold and you were trying to reinvent, and I just lost the name of the format that you created.
Yeah, Be Fresh.
I'm sorry?
Be Fresh.
Be Fresh. And I can remember you saying to me at the time, in a lot of ways, the supermarket experience hasn't changed much in 50 years, and we need to figure out a way to do it better, different. And you had this little skunk works that created this, what I thought was a great format. Unfortunately, well, we won't get into that. Anyway, but I did think in looking at HealthQuarters, one of the things that occurred to me as you took me through it was that it was rethinking the notion of visiting the doctor or going for a healthcare appointment in a way that only a retailer could, in the sense that great retailers today, it seems to me, try to figure out how do you remove friction from the experience. And that's, to a great extent, I think, what you seem to be doing at HealthQuarters.
Yeah, Kevin, you're right. I mean, look, one of the things that, and you're right, we did have this conversation a few years back, just in the context of retail. And what becomes really evident and obvious, and as I mentioned to you, where the light bulb went off was that if I think about my visit to the doctor's office and what that feels like today and what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, not a whole lot's changed. And where it becomes really interesting is when you think about a good retail environment, we think about quality, we think about price, we think about experience, we think about expertise. So there's all sorts of things we associate with a value proposition and in shopping and retail and any consumption item that we have. Healthcare is not that different. We don't necessarily talk about it that way because I think in healthcare, people think that they don't have a choice, that the doctor they have, the hospital they have, everything that they have is almost like it's assigned to them and they have no choice. They can't really do anything about it. And that's what we're doing. We're doing what the good retailers did 15, 20, 30, 40 years over the last so many 2, 3 decades to start reinventing and rethinking what retail looks like. Is we're changing the experience of a visit to the doctor's office. We're changing whether it's the infrastructure. It doesn't have to be a brown carpet. It doesn't have to be the same chairs around the perimeter. It can actually be a warm and friendly place. Nice music playing in the background, free Wi-Fi. You can get coffee. You can get a beverage. You can actually sit comfortably without worrying what's going to happen to you. It's no secret and no coincidence that when you go to a doctor's office, very often when they check your blood pressure, it's higher. Well, it's because the environment we've created, this whole sterile environment, there's all sorts of people walking around in white coats and you don't know what's going to happen. And we just want to make this a much better experience and something where people look, nobody's ever going to go to the doctor's office and say, what an amazing visit.
Right.
But we want people to walk out saying, well, that wasn't so bad. And I feel a bit better too.
Well, there were two things that you said to me when I was visiting HealthQuarters that really kind of sort of crystallized it for me. And one was that you said to me that, when you look at the average visit to the doctor, you might be at the doctor's office for a half an hour, 40 minutes, but you're only really with the doctor maybe for 5 to 10 of those minutes. And those 5 to 10 minutes, if you got a good doctor, those are fine. That you're perfectly happy with that piece of it. It's the other stuff that sort of those are the friction points that sort of make it less pleasant than you'd like to be. And the other thing you said, and this is where you sort of related it back to the supermarket industry, is where do supermarkets generally carry pancake mix? You said, well, they generally carry it in the baking needs, but everybody looks for it in the breakfast section. And it's only when you start to resolve the notion of giving the customer what makes sense for the customer, as opposed to following, legacy approaches to how you do business, that you start to change the model and change the equation in a way that makes sense and which allows you to kind of move beyond where, traditional purveyors, whether you're a supermarket or a doctor, have been.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the pancake example, and you and I had a nice chuckle out of that because it's so true, right? Historically, people put pancake mix in the baking aisle because Bisquick makes pancake mix, and that's where they belong. But if you think about, if I think about healthcare the way my parents thought about healthcare when I was growing up, everything was about the family doctor or the primary care provider, and everything ended and started with that. Today, when you think about healthcare, if I think about my family, you think about yours, or any one of your readers or listeners think about it, people don't necessarily just think about healthcare the way we've historically thought about it. So they think about a primary care provider, they think about their family doctor, but they also think about their chiropractor. They think about their acupuncturist, their massage therapist, their nutritionist, their dentist, their ophthalmologist. There's so many different things that people think about when they think about healthcare. And yet the conventional healthcare ecosystem is still focused on primary care and the family doctor. And there's nothing wrong with that because that individual plays a huge role in your care. But we're actually bringing together on one platform. So our first site that we opened in New York City a couple of months back, when you walk in, we have a partnership with Mount Sinai, which is a leading health system in New York. They bring in primary care. They bring in 4 or 5 clinical specialties as well. But in the same building, in the same space, we have ophthalmology, we have an optometrist, we have orthodontal, we have dental, we have physical therapy, we have yoga, we have dental, we have a chiropractor, we have a nutritionist, we have a massage therapist. So there's so many other things that we have under one roof. So typically what otherwise would take you 3 or 4 days, maybe 4 or 5 different appointments on 6 different sides of corners of the town, you can actually do all of this in one building in one space. And that's the way. It's a bit about the grocery store. If you think about how supermarkets aggregated what used to be the meat shop, the produce shop, the convenience store, all under one roof. We're doing that with healthcare because that's how people think about their health. And so the pancake mix, the example is just similar in that let's bring healthcare to people the way they think about it, not the way it's been done historically.
And to be clear, this isn't emergency care. There are emergency care clinics out there, and it's not concierge care, right? It's neither of those things. This is preventative care. Is that where you're sort of positioning it?
It's wellness. It's wellness. We're not episodic. If you break your leg, you're not going to come to HealthQuarters. You'd go to a hospital, which is where you should go. What we're finding, Kevin, especially coming out of COVID, is that more than ever, people are thinking about healthcare differently. They're thinking about wellness. This whole concept of immunity is something that people have really started to focus on. Underlying health conditions, obesity, diabetes, all the various things that people think about. So we are building a platform with a very retailish kind of look and feel, and you've seen that obviously when you were at the site. More comfortable environment, but really helping people live healthier lives in a very proactive manner as opposed to reactive. For most people, healthcare has been reactive. You go to the doctor when you're sick. We're actually saying to us, come to us before you get sick. Let's talk about how you can live healthier, and we can help you treat things well before they become serious, or proactively even before you have the issue.
Now, one of the things you said to me is the neighborhood that you've opened your first and flagship unit in is actually sort of really ideal for your approach.
Yeah, we've opened in NoHo, which is at 632 Broadway, and what we're finding is that the NoHo area of New York City, we have a real estate partner, CBRE, and data that we've come to understand is some of the healthiest people and the most health-focused people live in that area. And so what we're seeing a lot of patients in their late 20s, early 30s. A lot of them don't have primary care providers. A lot of them haven't thought about healthcare comprehensively. They've thought about it very episodically. So we're actually finding that more and more the patients and the guests that are coming in the site are using more than one provider. So somebody who comes in to see a yoga, has a yoga session, may then actually go to physical therapy in the same space as well. And while they're there, they might see the nutritionist, because now it's very convenient. You could actually do it under one roof in one time in a very comfortable environment. So what we're finding is that a very proactive group of people who are thinking about health, and they find this space to be very comfortable, engaging, and I think that's what keeps bringing them back. Now, if we were in the Upper East Side, or if we're going to be somewhere in Connecticut or the suburbs of New Jersey, we would tailor the offer based on that geography. So it's no different than retail. If you think about a grocery store that you put in suburban Connecticut versus downtown New York City, your assortment would be different. Your space allocation would be different. Your pricing might even be different. In our case, we're thinking about the geography we're in and bringing in the right clinical specialties and/or the wellness platform that we think would be most appropriate for that area. And what we're seeing so far is that we're finding a really high degree of acceptance. People enjoy the fact that they're not walking in a sterile environment, and they're coming back.
Yeah. Now, you just mentioned three parts of the New York metropolitan area. But I mean, there's no reason you couldn't open this in a strip shopping center in Arkansas, or a part of Seattle or New Mexico, or wherever it happens to be, right? This is not just an urban format looking for that kind of demographic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We think this appeals to just a broad America. If you think about various neighborhoods, geographies, we have a national rollout plan. As we do this, we're thinking about partnerships as well. I mean, if you think about, there's so many people in the retail space. I mentioned to you when we met, Kevin, I don't know that there's a company on the face of the planet today that doesn't have a healthcare strategy. And so we are building a retail version of health in a very proactive manner, where we're actually helping people live healthier lives. So I think that one of the interesting things is how do we potentially, and we've started having some of these conversations, how do we partner with existing players in the space, people who have a physical footprint, people who have a virtual footprint. I think there's all sorts of possibilities out there, but I think it appeals to a cross section of America for sure.
Is there a natural inclination, do you think, demographically, in terms of younger people as opposed to older people who perhaps are more invested in a traditional doctor-patient relationship? They're used to doing it a certain way, or do you think there's the opportunity to persuade people of a certain age to say, oh, it's worth doing it this way?
Well, Kevin, look at you and I, right? We're not exactly, we're
spring
slightly,
chickens, I think, is the word you're looking for.
Yeah, we left the 20s a few minutes ago, right? But I think about Kevin in Connecticut. I think about Bhavdeep in New Jersey or New York City, and I think that if I understood what was going on and what the offer was, I mean, I don't know that you and I also want a comfortable place to go in, a warm environment where we can actually go to the dentist and the primary care provider. So I don't think necessarily that it appeals to a certain age group. I honestly believe that because you and I think we're pretty young, you and I think we're pretty sophisticated. We use technology, and we'd like to think we're, people of the
Yeah,
world.
we think we're much hipper than our kids think we are. Let's be
Well,
clear.
yeah, but we want the same thing. So I think that it represents a different idea. Look, for somebody like you and I, it might be cholesterol, it might be hypertension, it might be weight gain, whatever it might be. But I think that if you can build a wellness plan, I think that just like any good retailer appeals to, you customize your offer based on who's out there, what your target audience is, and what the opportunity is. I think every American wants to live a healthier life. I think COVID has really knocked some sense into us, and we're thinking about what's the best way to do it. And if there's somebody out there who can do this in a warm, friendly environment and bring it all under one roof, well, I think then I think there's something that appeals to just about everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Because you could have, I mean, you have a relationship with Mount Sinai, but you could also, depending on the market, you could have develop relationships with, general practitioners, and you could develop, that could be, I may not go to HealthQuarters to see my primary care physician, but for everything else, it makes an awful lot of sense if they refer me to the nutritionist or the, eye doctor or whoever it happens to be.
Yeah, and Kevin, we believe what we're seeing is that when you put a wellness provider under HealthQuarters roof, there's a certain amount of credibility that comes with that as well, because you have a local health system that's partnering with you. When people want to go to a chiropractor, or if they want to go to an acupuncturist, they actually don't know who's a good one or who's not a good one. And I think there's a little bit of credibility that comes with that. That's one. I think the second piece is that because people are now thinking about healthcare a bit differently, I think the idea that a wellness provider is co-located with a clinical specialist, there's a little bit of credibility that comes with that, and people start to accept that a bit more. So I think that going forward, I do think that the appeal is broad. I think what's going to be interesting is that more and more people are starting to accept alternative paths of care versus just going care provider is the place to start for sure. Certainly, there's a huge value that we get out of the clinical system that exists. But I think people are thinking about health differently. And I don't think it's always take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. I think it might be go exercise with the yoga instructor, go spend some time with a nutritionist, and really take a well-balanced approach to health, your health.
Well, and it's interesting when you think about, I mean, healthcare, like every other industry, has its silos. And, I would imagine that under most circumstances, Mount Sinai would just not be in the same building as a chiropractor, right? That just generally doesn't happen. And you've managed to break down that silo, it seems to me, in ways that align your concept with how consumers are thinking or patients are thinking, not necessarily how industry is thinking. And that to me is like a secret sauce.
And that goes back to the pancake mix, right? Because we were building stores and merchandising them the way the manufacturers set it up, or the way the warehouses were set up, and actually building a retail health space the way people are thinking about health, I think, is a big opportunity. And look, just about as I mentioned, every business, every company is thinking about a strategy in healthcare. I think if you can do that, exactly what you said, if you can bring it together the way people are thinking about health, not the way the conventional ecosystem has thought about it, I think there's something there. And what we're finding is that a huge number of people that are coming to the site, the level of satisfaction is very high. The Google reviews that we're getting, I was telling you before that one of our providers, I think, has 125 reviews on Google. All but one is a 5. That's unheard of. In any industry, it's unheard of. And that's what we're finding. So I think it's just the start of something really big. I think what's interesting as it pertains to retail is we're thinking about partnerships with retailers as well. We're thinking about, how, whether it's the drugstores that are thinking about it, whether it's conventional retailers that are thinking about it, whether it's the virtual retailers, the Amazons of the world and the Googles of the world, everybody's thinking about healthcare. I think that potentially a partnership in terms of how you can help people live healthier lives, and how you can do it with existing players with brick and mortar footprints or virtual, I think that's when it becomes really interesting as well.
Well, it is interesting. I mean, when you look at, companies, whether it's Amazon or Walmart or Kroger, all of which are really focused on the whole healthcare industry and figuring out how can they redefine their roles in it. or CVS, which is doing, on its side has been very aggressive about saying we're going to be, even to the point where they buy an insurance company. How can they redefine the healthcare business? I mean, it seems to me to be really fertile ground. Now, people will want to, what's your business model? What's, that people will want to understand exactly, how do you make money on this deal?
Well, look, it's a lease business, right? We lease out space, and then we then sublet the space to some of the providers that are in the building. The difference is that we own the experience, Kevin, and that's really important. So if you remember when you walked in, you have a greeter in terms of which is a HealthQuarters team member. We designed the entire space from a look and feel perspective, and really from a warmth and comfort perspective. We have retail products. We're building a retail offer, which is an opportunity for us to drive some revenue for the business. We also are looking at partnerships and collaborations, whether it's with retailers, whether it's with healthcare related players. We think there's a big opportunity with the pharmacy business in terms of in our site or virtual in our site. We think that's an opportunity as well. So I think it's a combination of what we do from a rent and lease perspective. I think the retail perspective is an opportunity for us as well. And then we think partnerships will yield as well. I can tell you that this, from a finance perspective and from a business results perspective, this is a business that's a highly profitable business. And we turn profitable fairly quickly.
The patients who come in, they all make appointments? Is it walk-ins? Do you see that evolving in one way or the other going forward?
Well, it's interesting. Most of healthcare is driven by appointments. Most of healthcare is driven by appointments. I would tell you that our expectation was that 95-97% of the people walking would be appointments, quite honestly, because that's the way healthcare typically is. You don't just walk into the doctor's office, you make an appointment. What we're finding now, because we are, we have a retail presence. We are on 632 Broadway, and you have a big HealthQuarters sign. What we're finding is that our providers, some of whom have been in business for the last 15, 20 years, I think I shared with you, one of our providers told me that he'd been practicing in the area for the last 20 years, that he's had more walk-ins in 4 months than he's had in 20 years. And that's a function of the fact that it's about access, right? It's about, finding something and you can actually go in. So we're actually building a platform where you can actually come into HealthQuarters and say, what hours is such and such provider available today? And we tell you that they're available this time. And it might just be a walk-in appointment as well. So we're making access easy and we're making it simpler. We're doing it in one. So if we have 100 people come in a day, and if 10 of those are walk-in, Kevin, there's a good chance that those 10 might not otherwise go to the doctor, right? Because they don't have an appointment. And that's really interesting, because if we believe that our walk-ins are going to grow to 10, 15, 20%, that's a significant number of people that otherwise might not have gotten attention from a provider, be it clinical or wellness.
I love the idea of the interface that tells people who's available and when. It's almost like those signs you have at parking lots saying, there's 5 spaces on the 4th level, and there's 47 spaces on the 8th level, or whatever it happens to be. That's a really smart, and again, it's very consumer centric. What role, how does it work in terms of people are going to want to know insurance and billing, and what do you play a role in that? You've got Mount Sinai, which I'm sure has its own deal, but then you have this amalgamation of other providers, retailers. How do you work with them?
Yeah, I'll talk about insurance in a second. I just want to go back to your earlier point for a second, Kevin, because it's really interesting. There are too many instances in our lives where we find out about a family member or a friend, or somebody we just acquaintance had a heart attack, or somebody who's been diagnosed with something in a stage 3 or stage 4. And you ask yourself, why does this happen? Why stage 4? And one of the things that we found out, and there's lots and lots of data to support this, is that people are getting diagnosed in stage 3, stage 4 because they're not going to the doctor, or they're going to the doctor and not following up based on some recommendation the provider gave them. And so just going back to the walk-in appointment piece as an example, or if you think about, the fact that somebody comes in to see their primary care provider, but while they're there, they also go see the orthopedic surgeon. This is a huge opportunity to really head off some of these things that we hear about, whether it's stage 3, stage 4, whether it's a heart attack, whatever it might be. The idea that people are getting the kind of preventive care in a timely fashion, and because the system is so challenging, because conventional healthcare can be a maze to navigate. That's a big opportunity for us. So I just want to make that point because as much as this is a commercial model, as much as this is, look, at the end of the day, we're a for-profit business, obviously. But I can tell you one thing, that over a period of 2, 3, 4, 5 years, as we open up 10, 15, 20, 30 locations, what I'm absolutely sure of, that there will be people who will either be living healthier lives or be there that otherwise might have been a different outcome. And I think that's a pretty impactful thing, because if you can actually improve the access, the material impact would be significant.
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, absolutely. I mean, I think for-profit businesses are a lot more interesting when they actually want to change the world.
And
I like
and that's exactly right. Right. I think we have I wouldn't be so boastful or arrogant to tell you that we're going to change the world, but I certainly think we can have a hand in helping people live healthier lives. I'll answer your question very quickly on insurance. We accept whatever insurance the provider accepts. So if it's the health system, and most health systems accept most insurance, we accept that. If it's
But do you handle, to what extent do you get involved with the billing and stuff like that? I mean, that's what I guess people would want to know.
For the health system, we don't get involved. It's their system, because there's from a HIPAA perspective, or any other health system we do, because from a HIPAA perspective, what a patient comes for, what kind of treatment they get, the laws are very specific around that, so we don't. For the other providers, we do take care of billing, but from a HIPAA perspective and privacy perspective, we know who comes in, we know when they come in, we know who they see. What happens behind closed doors, we don't know, and we shouldn't.
I guess I guess what I was wondering is if I see the chiropractor, the nutritionist, and the massage therapist,
One bill.
in such a way that I'm getting one bill and all that stuff sort of together. So I'm thinking about HealthQuarters holistically, but then HealthQuarters is also thinking about me holistically.
Yeah. So the Sinai piece would be separate.
Right.
If you saw the other three that you just mentioned, one bill.
Gotcha.
One bill, one transaction, and fairly simple in that respect. We have a call center as well. Similarly, for appointments, you can call the one call center and make 6 appointments if you want. At the same time, you can ask who's available on which day, and it is meant to make things easier for the patient and the guest as well.
And so right now you're in Greenwich Village, but if you open one on the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side, Westchester, New Jersey, Connecticut, will all those be in communication with each other? So if I'm a patient, I live in Connecticut, I go to the one up here, but I happen to be in the city and I need to go do something, I can do that? Is the idea to make it all integrated?
Yes. Yeah, the idea would be to make it integrated. And again, the health system would be separate, only because the health systems are separate. But for the other providers, the idea would be to do exactly that.
Well, listen, I appreciate your explaining this and kind of sharing it with the Morning Newsbeat audience. I got to tell you, I mean, listen, one of the things, you and I have known each other a long time, and I know you read Morning Newsbeat, so you know that one of my mantras is that retailers are better off if they're not just a source of product, but also a resource for consumers. And I think that one of the things that this does is, especially as you begin to partner, not just with health systems, but potentially with retailers and other kinds of companies, is that this becomes an amazing resource for consumers, and maybe not change the whole world, but maybe change a little bit of the world a little bit at a time, which is it's a pretty good thing to do these days.
Yeah. Look, that's the hope. That's what we're working on, and it's early days yet. First location, we're going to open our second location by the end of the year in Brooklyn. We have a couple more locations coming in New Jersey, and then we go New England towards you as well, Kevin.
I have one last request. Could you put one of these things at Citi Field? Because I think the Mets can use all the healthcare help they can get. I don't even know who's playing out at Citi Field anymore. I mean, it's
I guess this would be a good time to say that Kevin and I discovered over the course of our conversation that we are longtime Met fan sufferers, and probably going back about 4 decades or so. So I hear you, and it's going to take a little bit of time, like everything else does in Queens.
A HealthQuarters at Citi Field. I think that's got to be a high priority. Look, Bhavdeep, listen, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. I will provide people with information about how to get in touch with you at the bottom. And I wish you good luck, and I'm looking forward to tracking your growth.
All right. Thank you very much, Kevin. My pleasure again.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.